My name is Sunjen Young. I'm a managing director at Oppenheimer & Company, which is a mid-market investment bank. I lead our digital media and internet investment banking practice here out of New York, and I'm very pleased today to be able to moderate this panel on widgets. The name of the panel is Widgets as a Platform, Content, Commerce, and Communications. So if you're not here to get fully immersed in this topic, which is very hot these days, then you're in the wrong room. So this is your chance to leave. We've got a great group of panelists here, which I think is a very good representation of leaders in this growing and momentum-filled space. In addition to that, we have Turner Broadcasting, which represents the traditional media perspective, which is very important when you talk about anything going on with widgets and digital media and social media. And for most people, at its simplest form, a widget is a miniature application or a website that resides as a component element on a user's desktop, social media page, or mobile device. More practically, I like to think about, I was telling some of the panelists here that I was at my kids' chess tournament this weekend, and while I was waiting for them between games, I was throwing sheep at some of my friends on Facebook. But there are lots of great applications out there, like cities I've visited, or I think our panelists will talk about some of the other interesting applications. But before I let our panelists introduce themselves formally and talk about what their companies are doing in the sector to kick off the discussion, I just wanted to show a couple of slides which I hope will help set the context for some of the dynamics in a broader environment that are going on that are impacting social media and how widgets can play a role in that. So I just wanted to show you, and our panelists can't see it here, but I wanted to show you some analytical work that we've done, which looks at the changing internet traffic dynamic over the last couple of years. And so what we've done is we have graphed the internet traffic on a monthly basis from the top 3 internet portals, so AOL, Microsoft, and Yahoo, and we've juxtaposed it against the traffic from the top 3 social media sites, MySpace, Facebook, and YouTube. And what's really interesting here is that you see a couple of years ago when social media was just starting to take off, there was a big difference in viewers. But as of last fall and to today, the results are through January, this is based on ComScore data, you can see that the traffic levels are almost equal. And so everyone talks about how social media is really popular and how there are millions and millions of users now on Facebook and MySpace, but it's very interesting to see how this trend is actually shaped up in terms of numbers, and then to think about, well, why is this happening? As well as what are some of the outcomes of this? I mean, one of the outcomes is that Microsoft saw that the dynamics were changing, and so they made an investment at a very hefty valuation in Facebook. I think our panel here today would put, or many of them would put forth the theory that the rise of widgets and the popularity of widgets has a lot to do with helping to drive the traffic to these social media websites, and in the future propelling the social media websites forward and bringing forth more engaging content, and also leading to new revenue opportunities, including advertising. And so Kevin Friedman from Slide shared with us some other ComScore data, which is based on their widget index. And what's really interesting about this that you can see is that there has been a very broad proliferation of widgets. I mean, I think some people estimate that the number of individual and developers and companies in this space worldwide are close to 100,000 in number right now. But the reach for some of these companies already is quite amazing. Slide alone has almost 150 million monthly uniques across all of the different websites through which its widgets are distributed. And you can see any number of companies, including companies on this panel, that also rank very highly. So, I think one of the questions that we'll talk about is, what does a widget actually mean? Because it has different definitions to different people. What's the longevity? What is the future of the widget as a platform? What are the business models and the different monetization opportunities? What's the right distribution? And then, where do things go from here? But again, I just think this helps to set the stage a little bit. And so with that, let me turn it over to my panelists to just spend a couple of minutes introducing themselves and talking about what they and their companies are doing in this space. Go ahead, Dan.
Sure. Hi, I'm Dan Reese. I am Vice President of New Products at Turner Broadcasting. New Products is a group, it's a corporate group. There's obviously tons of people doing new products across what is an 8,000 person company, but there's also a corporate group which focuses on products and platforms that go and are necessary across all of our divisions, and try to get out ahead of those and ensure that our different, and when I say divisions, I mean our networks, have the basic platform and capabilities they need to start executing on these things. So widgets is obviously a focus for us. I think on this panel I'll obviously represent the traditional media folks and can potentially speak about why certain things may be a little bit of a challenge, learning curve, but also a big opportunity in how we're looking at that.
Okay. My name is Eric Altman. I'm the founder and chairman of KickApps Corporation. KickApps is a software as a service platform that allows publishers to deploy social networking, user-generated content, widgets, video players, all programmable, all as hosted applications. And in this context for widgets, KickApps has a widget building as a capability, as one of a set of tools that publishers can use to deploy social media. The spin for KickApps is that widgets are a way to actually deploy applications as opposed to being just consumer-facing or consumer deployed applications. So for KickApps, widgets are literally how you deploy media on your site as a publisher, not necessarily for user-generated media or user-oriented content as, either. The other thing we do is we're a container, or we'll shortly announce that we're a container for both Facebook and Open Social, such that any website who wants third-party widgets plugged into their architecture can use KickApps as the basis for profiling and so on. One last thing is widget ads. Widgets is something that we'll be announcing soon too, and so widgets are an important part of our ecosystem.
My name is Kevin Friedman. I'm the Vice President of Finance and Operations for Slide. We are the leading social entertainment company is how we view ourselves, as social entertainment. As was mentioned, we're in front of about 150 million people each month. And an additional 40 million people on Facebook. And the way that we've gotten there is we basically make the applications that drive a lot of the engagement on the various social networks, such as MySpace and Facebook. The throwing sheep example is actually from one of our applications called SuperPoke on Facebook. We basically use those applications to engage with consumers and have them share their photos and videos and various other content. And some of the opportunities that we have from an advertising and a media perspective, through those applications, media companies can actually integrate their content with consumers' own individual content to sort of make it part of their entertaining experience.
Hi, my name is Human Radfar. I am the founder and CEO of ClearSpring Technologies. ClearSpring is the leading widget syndication network that connects publishers and advertisers to audiences on what we're calling the social web. So we focus not only on social networks, but blogs, start pages, and desktop aggregation tools. For publishers, we have tools that make it simple to create viral widgets, distribute those widgets, track those widgets, and monetize those widgets. On the advertising side, we make it very, very simple to run branded media campaigns where you can distribute and track through our affiliate network. We've served about 27 billion views to date. We work with a number of the folks in this room, including Turner, NBC, Disney, and others, so over 150 brands to date. And I think we have in our developer network at this point roughly 10,000 publishers and advertisers and growing. So we have a lot of experience working with media companies and are happy to kind of cover from that angle.
Great. Well, let's get started here, and we'll leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the panel for questions from the audience. Some of the interesting statistics out there show that, for example, on Facebook alone, and I think marketers really started to take notice of widgets when Facebook announced in May of last year that they were going to open up their platform to third-party developers. So now there are nearly 17,000 applications on Facebook. However, I saw a stat that only 138 had more than 1 million installations, according to one of the services, Adonomics, that tracks that. Do you think that widgets are a fad in terms of generating more excitement than money? And are we beginning to experience a little apps fatigue, or are widgets really just beginning to establish themselves as a building block for the future of the internet? So who'd like to take a first crack at that?
I guess I can, specifically from a Facebook perspective, I think what you're actually seeing is sort of the normal curve that develops in any sort of environment as it's being formed. If you look at sort of the portals, there are probably thousands of portals out there, but there are only a handful that actually have a lot of 80–90% of the users. And you're seeing the same thing in the social networks. There are thousands of social networks, but there are 5 or 6 that are actually really large: MySpace, Facebook, Bebo, High5, Friendster, and Orchid. There are thousands of other ones out there. And on the application side, you're seeing sort of the same thing, where you have Slide and probably 2 or 3 others that at this point have about 80+% of the market. So it's fairly consistent, where you'll have lots of sort of the long tail is an expression that is used. That does exist, but the bulk still seem to be from the largest players who are really focused on it. One of the things to keep in mind when you're working with different application providers is that there are many companies out there, or many sets of people there. A lot of these people are 2 friends sitting in a garage building an application, but there are only a handful that are actually really trying to make large businesses out of this, which is why you're seeing sort of that distribution, because it really takes focus to scale beyond a few 100,000 users, because that is actually a fairly difficult thing to do.
From our perspective, again, we're not just focused on Facebook, so a lot of the widgets that we develop or people develop on our platform go out into MySpace, blogs, desktops. So for instance, we've seen certain widgets that were developed on our platform that we thought would be fairly popular on MySpace that ended up being extremely popular in Mac OS X. So from a fatigue perspective, I think people focus a lot around Facebook, which is just one aspect of it, but a lot of the applications developed on that, to his point, there will obviously end up being a distribution which is similar to the rest of the web, but the way we view widgets and the way we encourage our clients to view it is, how much of an extension of reach do you get, relatively speaking? Do you need to be, as big as, you like to be as big as these guys, but what is success, right? So we've had people that get, let's call it 150,000 people to install an application across various sites. Just used start pages, for instance, like Google. And so there's people who are viewing those, millions and millions of times a day. That's success for some of those people, considering their reach has increased by 10,000% versus what it was before. So I think you have to kind of look at it relative to where you are today with your current digital strategy, and then look at it as a factor of that.
The thing I would add is that widgets have several contexts. One is on Facebook and MySpace and so forth, and that's kind of what people are focusing on a consumer level. But widgets are also video players. And widgets are a lot of different applications that have nothing to do with the major social media sites, the blocking and tackling of publishing sites. It's, to my view, the way you deploy applications. And so as you see more software as a service hosted application companies that are providing things like we do, video and social networking and other things, is actually, but there's 1,000 other applications, it's not just ours, they will deploy with widgets. It's just a piece of code that lands on another site that expresses an application, a way to interact with something. As the portals get more and more into syndication of content as opposed to being the place you go to watch it, they will have widget platforms that will have nothing to do with plugging into MySpace and Facebook or Orchid. It'll be the ecosystem that allows the expression of all sorts of things on every single consumer-facing website in the world. So to me, the conversation can be broader to include how you actually deploy software as a service applications and everything on every website, not just necessarily plugging in as a kind of module on someone's profile page. It's a very limited view of what a widget is. And to me, it kind of came up in the last 8 months. Prior to that, and I think going forward, widgets are going to have a much more important meaning in other contexts, and also as advertising units. Literally, instead of a banner ad, it's a widget, a trademark kick-apps thing. Thank you. But it's how to get that early. The concept of an ad that allows you to express, you're Procter & Gamble, you're selling some product, and you want to have just an ad that does a lot more. This has nothing to do with a plug-in. It has nothing to do with a social network. It's just a widget that is an ad unit. And so to me, once you begin thinking of it that way, widgets become much more interesting.
Yeah, I'd second that. I mean, at Turner, we're using things across all three of those areas. There's behind the scenes at CNN, we have a vast array of affiliates who send us news and we send them news, and in a lot of cases that kind of technology is extremely helpful and we're using it, and no one ever really sees that that's how we're distributing content. It's a critical software application for a business. On the marketing side, we have each of our networks, and ClearSpring's been quite helpful, I think, in this area, deploying widgets for their own marketing purposes, getting news out about their new show, engaging with fans. And again, in terms of what is the level of success, a lot of these have 25,000, 50,000, 100,000 active users, and we feel that relative to the cost is an extreme success. It's just another way to interact with our brands and get deeper fanship out of the folks that we're in need of contacting and getting information back from. And the third piece of it is advertising. So I think the question was, are they a fad? And it's really about, of these components, which one may or may not be a fad. I think from an application standpoint, it's already massively ingrained into the fabric of the web. I think from a marketing standpoint, you'll see a lot of media companies coming to the table and looking to use. Paramount announced just the other day that they'll be porting their clips through Facebook, where people can send clips to each other. And this is every media company is looking at this kind of thing from a marketing standpoint. And then there's the advertising piece of it, where a lot of us make a lot of money selling advertising, and we're looking at widgets as a way to extend reach, extend real estate, and offer new value to our clients. That one is an interesting area, just because I think what we're seeing now, and I'm talking about on the media company side, and I'm talking about the types of units that are being offered to advertisers, I think it's just the beginning of what can be offered. I think at the moment it's interesting, it's relatively limited, but there's big opportunities there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that as this grows, it's very important to keep in mind the context of what the user is trying to do. So just creating a widget that because you've now created a distributed piece of content does not necessarily mean that it will spread across the web or even to a large audience of what you're looking for. But the context of why would a user actually want it and how do I integrate it into that experience is extremely important to keep in mind. It's sort of, ads on most social networks at this point have not really performed very well because from a context perspective they don't really make sense, whereas the distributed content is actually a great example of something within one of our applications on Facebook called Funwall, where users are actually taking movie clips and videos and commercials, and this Funwall actually allows them to share that content with their friends. And the reason that works is because they're actually in the mode of sharing funny or things that they find interesting. So as you're experimenting with these things, it's very important to keep in mind the context of what you're trying to accomplish and what the user is doing.
I think that's actually, from a media company perspective, that's the critical balance that we face in terms of, we have massive reach through other platforms. So when you look at the reach of one of our widgets, for example, there's plenty of people in the company that are, who cares, That said, it's highly engaging. But there is a balance to be struck, and I think a lot of media companies are struggling with this, which is our gut reaction is, oh, cool, here's another way to push our content out to people, and now we can even tack an advert. This is great. This is like Web 2.0, but now we can make money on it. This is excellent. But really what has to happen is some thinking about how consumers use widgets, and it's not just about putting your content through and maybe can you serve a pre-roll or a banner next to it. It's probably more about figuring out how your content can add value in that situation. And in that respect, it's really just a microcosm of the latest iteration of the web.
Yeah. One thing is context I would add is when you see widgets on publishing sites that have context, as opposed to social networks, which often lack context. Once again, it's that ecosystem that gets healthier around advertising within a sports site, and you're seeing widgets. And you're seeing when you click on that widget, that's not the end of the experience. You now get a page, and that page has deeper contextual relationships and has knowledge about who's there. But you're within a specific domain, a specific site. So widgets in context, I think, are the key to monetization of all this. And when you see widgets being the basic building block of every publishing site, every consumer-facing site, not just social media networks, then a lot of the questions about monetization get answered as well.
Well, particularly the last two comments are a great sequitur to the next question in terms of widgets need to provide context, and they need to, you have to look at consumer behavior and consumer usage. But what kind of widgets have you found to be the most successful to date? And then looking over the next year and a half, which is probably about as far as anyone can see in the future, do you think those same types of widgets will be successful as well? I mean, how do you view that?
From our perspective, I mean, I think one thing that's is kind of becoming apparent is that there's these different classes of applications. And so, again, success is a relative term. So, for instance, if you're a publisher versus an advertiser, success can be very different things. But we've seen a strong correlation between what was successful in, call it, Web 1.0 and Web 2.0. So if you look at social applications in terms of as a class of these distributed applications, and I'm talking about Facebook apps, the things that Rock Use Slide have been doing, it's a lot of the things that are the most popular communication-centric. And then, secondarily, you look at key vertical areas that are skewed towards the demo. So I think that one thing that we advise people to do is just look at what was successful in the past. Although this is a new medium, we're not talking, consumers haven't changed fundamentally, right? I mean, they do want to have increased control, but they've always wanted that. They just now have a tool. Their content consumption, types of content they want are the same. So I would look at that as one factor. And then the second piece of it is in terms of the things that are really, really popular. Again, it depends on what your campaign is. So, for instance, Eric made a really good point. I think the widget as video players, right? It's kind of everyone talks about, well, how popular is a Facebook app, but video players are just everywhere. I mean, if you looked at the total size of the video player market and just that, like content clips, I'm sure it would be just enormous. And I mean, I've talked to the ComScore folks; they're having a tremendous time trying to categorize those.
Yeah, where we've seen a lot of the success with the applications is really focusing on the consumer and what they're trying to get out of it. So you need to find an application or a widget that is engaging to the consumer. And what we've focused on is really their own social experiences, whether it's their photos or videos or just communicating and connecting with friends. So again, it's sort of our focus is mainly obviously in the social networking space. As the numbers show, it seems to be the quickest growing area right now on the web. So in order to get in front of that audience, you really need to build things that enable them to share the things that they're interested in, and that's their own personal content. And then as a media company, one of the things that we provide to media companies and marketers is the ability to then add your content to that same experience. And it's sort of no different than how do you figure out the right T-shirt to sell someone? Sometimes people will actually pay for things with your logo on them or a funny picture and things like that. So finding a way to include your content in that experience. You can certainly go out and build applications and widgets, but it's also, it does take a lot of effort to maintain a widget and an application and make sure that it scales and go beyond sort of that initial experience. So as you're looking at these things, you don't necessarily have to go and build a full application. You can work with companies that actually already do that, such as some of the ones up here, to actually just include your content and allow the consumers to decide whether or not they want to include it. And if you make it where it's engaging enough, then it will just spread quicker than it's ever been possible to do.
To me, I think video is exactly right. I think that's going to be the most popular widget going. And the reason is, if you can imagine right now, all these ad networks, billions of dollars been spent on these ad networks, and they're all competing for inventory on lots of websites out there. And right now, they're basically saying, here's some inventory, and we'll give you a better cost per thousand than the next ad network. But soon, these ad networks are going to find other ways to compete for that inventory. And one way is by providing programming. And that programming is going to be two types of programming. It's going to be content, video, primarily, but also photos, all kinds of other content as well, and social content. But it's also going to be functionality, so programming. So when you look at what NBC does to earn its advertising network, all those independent affiliates, every fall they come out with a new programming schedule, most of the time anyway. That's how you earn the advertising inventory. So as these ad networks and the portals behind them and so on get into and understand that they're competing in a world for scarcity, and that is advertising inventory in context, outside of social media, I mean, on all the other publishing sites in the world, they're going to have to provide programming, and those sites are not able to deal with, SOAP and REST calls and so on. They just want an easy way to deploy that content on their site, and they want media management to not only get that content, but also promote their content. So I see the ad networks and the big portals really having widget platforms, media management, reporting all behind it, such that they can be the distribution center, the sort of NBC, so to speak, or ABC of the internet. And that's a big growth area, and I think it's mainly video.
Forgot what the question is. I'm always down here.
That's okay.
Let's get back on track. Let's try to get back on track.
I was curious, Dan, as to what kind of widgets at Turner that you found to be successful today.
I mean, look, some of our sites have like a CNN.com with, it's not a lot of uniques compared to a Slide 150, but 35 million uniques. It's just simply an easier way for people to experience CNN.com by grabbing the piece of CNN.com that they want and putting it where they want it. And those have done well. I think video has been interesting. I think the success is we're maybe halfway there. There's a lot of educating to do throughout media companies. I could relate a story that we're working on a specific widget-based advertising product that our sales teams will bring to market. And when I pitched it to some of our senior executives, there was a question. They asked me to rename widget. They thought that I had branded this thing a widget, and they just thought the name sucked. So
they thought they were going back to Econ 101?
Yeah, kind of. They were like, I love this idea, but the name is a little strange. Can we call it something not generic like widget? Anyways, that's just an example of sort of there's a learning curve. It's not just about pushing your video content out. And so I think some of the things that you're starting to see where it's less, it's the general conundrum of media companies, which are, it seems easy to put our clips into a slide application where people can throw sheep and Turner Classic Movies at each other. It's just that we have a bunch of rights deals and other things that make that content not entirely always available to put in there. So that's the kind of thing you just need to weed through. I will, call it what it is. I mean, if you look at the three categories that make things go on the web, and I'm generalizing, but there's the functionality category, there's the community category, and there's the content category, and we happen to be sitting on one of them. And the other two are things that we're not particularly good at just yet. So I think there's a lot to learn there.
Well, we've started to talk a little bit about advertising, and I wanted to get more into monetization. What are the different types of business models that are being employed to date? I mean, I think people here represent a pretty diverse span of business models. Some companies are going directly to consumers, others are going to advertisers, but advertising does pop up as the principal monetization source. Who wants to take a crack at that?
So from our perspective, we've been pretty focused on monetization from the outset. We focused on metrics, which is obviously a backbone for monetization. So I think there are a couple ways. So from a publisher perspective, you can create a widget and you can view that as an extension of your digital strategy, right? So let's take NBA.com or NBC.com, for instance. They look at that as, okay, I have a virtual set of websites, if you will, outside my domain. So the monetization mechanisms there are fairly plain. Either they're going to directly monetize it with some sort of in-widget advertising with someone like us, or there are commerce opportunities, right? So just like you would look at your website, there's those parallels. If you are a publisher, another way to monetize is actually taking the inventory on your website and allowing people to distribute widgets through it. So that's another way to do it that a lot of the Web 2 companies we work with are doing. So we're working with RockU and some other folks and actually using some of their inventory on their website to distribute widgets at a higher CPM than they would have typically gotten. Now you switch on to the advertiser side, and I think you were mentioning something that was really poignant. Advertisers view the widget itself sometimes as an ad, right? So they can go and reach people by advertising inside of a widget, but a really new dynamic category is the widget as an ad. So, we're working with folks like Point Roll so that we can distribute widgets through the traditional ad networks and rich media. And then I think there's also a number of other interesting networks that are popping up where the widget itself is just an ad through these, niche networks. So I think there's plenty of monetization opportunities. And again, I would draw the parallel, and it's something that I've consistently kind of stuck to. It is a new category, it's a new name, but I think a lot of what's happening is very much, Web 1.0. I mean, it just depends on who you are. If you're a publisher, there's certain models and they're translating. If you're an advertiser. Now, what formats are effective, I think that's where a little bit of science has to go into it, right, when you have different form factors and such. I mean, video in particular.
You asked the question, do you go to consumers first or advertisers? And for us, there's really not really a question on that, because if you go to advertisers without having any consumers to show their ads to, you're not going to actually be able to make any money. So really trying to find a way to get distribution is important at the start, and then find a way to actually encourage users to love your products. And then once you have that relationship with them, then you go to advertisers, and you can start to monetize through advertisements. And it's really important to not push the ads too soon, because if you do, you're going to alienate your users. And as Huma was saying, if it looks like an ad, the consumers know that, and then they ignore that pretty quickly. They sort of treat them, it's like you're driving down the street in a bus, and ads become speed bumps, and they've learned how to avoid banner ads pretty much to almost 100% at this point. So from monetization strategy, advertisements are part of it, but the question is, how do you do that in an integrated fashion and not have it actually make it look like an ad? And then on the consumer side, this is entertainment for people, at least with the things that we do. And just like people pay for some of their entertainment in the offline world, you will be able to, and you will see it, especially internationally, you already see it a lot, where people are paying, for parts of their entertainment, whether it's, some of these online virtual worlds where they pay for virtual goods and things like that. So you will see that as a pretty big revenue stream as well, I think, over the next couple of years. But advertising is probably the low-hanging fruit, and it's the first things that companies are doing. But I think it's very much the early stages.
For us, we don't go to the advertiser, nor do we go to consumers. We go to web publishers. So for us, we're serving, in terms of impressions, about a 250 million page impressions in our whole network. But for us, it's all mostly acquired by publishers, giving them the ability to build widgets themselves. And our new widget studio environment and video player building environment will allow people to sort of drag and drop and build a widget with a bunch of components. You don't even have to be a Flash programmer to do it. The reason we're focused on that is because we think publishers don't have the skills in-house, but large media companies, advertising agencies don't even have enough talent to build the number of widgets that are necessary. So for us, widget building is a tool for publishers of all sorts, and that's who we go to, and that's how we earn our inventory, by going to the people who have contextual traffic already, as opposed to trying to create our own traffic or going to the social media sites to create traffic.
I do think one thing that's come up recently, and we've experimented with this, and we have a bunch of products that will come out shortly based on this, is the ability to put widgets in ad inventory, as Human said, which is, from a media standpoint, it does open up a lot of opportunities in terms of how to package it for an advertiser, how to create value for an advertiser in a way that you may not ordinarily get. You have to understand that if you look at the top, if you go to Facebook, Appsaholic, any of the rankings of widgets, you'll look at the ones that are the most popular, and they're not necessarily the ones pushed with traditional media content in them. That's okay. We're not worried. I mean, it's obviously something we need to address on both fronts. But I think to the extent that we do have content and we are able to package it for advertisers, the ability to put it into ad space is extremely helpful.
So, I saw another statistic, which is by eMarketer, that said in 2008 they're projecting that U.S. web widget and application ad spending is going to just be $40 million. So 2.5% of the $1.6 billion in online social network spending, which means that we truly are at the beginning, if you believe those numbers. What are the top 3 things that you think are needed to make advertising an effective monetization source here?
In terms of advertising within the widget, or using the widget as a vehicle, or the widget as an ad?
Anything related to ad dollars being spent around the widget?
So I'll kind of start with the latter. So if you're an advertiser, I mean, what we've seen in terms of being effective, it really depends on the vertical. So for instance, in entertainment, which is a really great vertical to start with and typically leads in these kind of early stage technology opportunities, it really is about compelling content. And so when we look at, for instance, like Paramount, we did a campaign with Cloverfield. I don't think anyone who was putting that on their page viewed it as an advertisement or anything like that. It was simply a contest where they put a trailer on, just no different than they would go ahead and put a YouTube video. So to the degree that you can make it, I think the word that's been echoed here a lot is context. Once advertising is relevant, it's no longer advertising, it's content. And so your kind of goal, I think, as an advertiser when you're looking at a widget as an ad, is to make it content for the right people. I think in terms of in-widget monetization, our advice is start very, very, very small, if not at all, as a publisher. I mean, understand, to the point that was made earlier, that this is new. Try to figure out what generates traffic for your widgets before you rush into monetization. But as you're going into monetization, I think, and I hate to say it's a lot of blocking and tackling, A/B testing, very small. I mean, don't just put a huge banner out there and expect that people are going to like it, because I don't think that worked in Web 1.0. It's not going to work now.
Yeah, I mean, you need a little bit of sort of a spotlight shown on the sides, which I think has happened over the last 6 or 8 months, because again, from an advertising perspective, if there's no audience, there's really no market for it. But now that the size of the audience has been established, it's now just a matter of sort of showing results. And coming out, a lot of people have talked, you have to have standards and things like that. But the reality is, you don't get standards until you figure out what works. So the first thing, and a lot of what we've been doing, we've been working with a lot of advertisers such as Palm and AT&T, Paramount and some other, big advertisers. And one of the things that we've seen is, as we tested our first couple of units, we very quickly figured out which ones made sense. And, Superpoke is sort of one of the examples where, right now we're running a campaign with McDonald's where they basically sponsor a Superpoke. And the interaction that they're getting with that versus getting a 5 basis point click-through rate, because it's a direct interaction with consumers where it's a one-on-one connection, your interaction rates are in some cases over 50%, because fewer people, it's being distributed fewer times, but it's actually being engaged with almost all the time, unless they never check their Facebook profile or their MySpace profile, which according to Facebook stats, more than 50% of people come back every day. So as long as they're interacting with that site, then they are interacting with your, in some cases, advertisement, but from their perspective, just their entertainment. So getting results, showing that you have an audience, and then it will work itself out, and you'll go from, I'm not sure where the 40 million came from, but you quickly go from a very small market to a quickly growing and large market.
I would add that the monetization in context is going to be a big deal, and you might say the death of the banner ad is approaching, because it'll be all video. Every ad will move, and you won't look at it as a banner ad anymore. It'll be looked upon as media. And especially as people get more comfortable in older demos using their DVRs and TiVos and so on, online having video ads, widget ads we call them, is going to be everything. And so that's a huge concept, especially when you're looking at ads in context. And the ability to distinguish between content and ads is going to be what's difficult on the web soon. And right now you could just start to see it happening. You're watching a video, and then even I sometimes look and say, oh, that's an ad, and I've watched it, as opposed to banner ads, which are largely ignored, and click-through rates are going down and so on. So watch for widgets as an ad unit in the context of sites that are getting $80 CPMs, $20 CPMs, as opposed to 20-cent CPMs, and that's, I think, where it's at.
You asked about success stories, and I had glossed over one of them, which is in the sports area. We operate NASCAR.com, PGA Tour.com, will be taking over, or in partnership with the NBA for their sites in October, taking over operations of those sites. Sports actually works fabulous in widgets. Race predictions for NASCAR. These are things that have been extremely successful for us. All kinds of statistics and other drivers' cars, et cetera. And those are also areas where it's been relatively natural to integrate advertisers. I mean, it's hard to imagine anything NASCAR without a lot of sponsors' logos on it, so it actually works out really well. But they've also been where we've, I think, found the best mix of our content and some user and community interaction that's worked really well. So I think those types of areas have near-term, low-hanging fruit potential on the advertising side.
Given that there's a lot of different constituencies when you talk about widgets, is there enough potential revenue to share amongst all the constituencies? Because you've got the widget companies, the target websites, advertisers, content providers. I mean, one of the things that happened, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago when people got really excited about interactive TV was that if you actually stacked up how much money everyone thought they were going to make, the consumer was going to pay, $150 or something like that a month, which wasn't realistic. Yeah. Well, now maybe we do it to the cable and telco operators, but.
And the question, I'm not sure if that question is as big a concern as, is there enough money to have all this advertising happening online and on television and everywhere else? I mean, people are shifting a lot of their entertainment time from sitting in front of a television and actually having interactive entertainment, where people are now sitting in front of the TV with their laptops, on their laps and actually on the computer at the same time, and they're watching TV by actually being on their computer and hearing what's going on. So over time, the $70 or $80 billion that's spent on television, has definitely begun to shift. And so, a few percentage point shift of those dollars into online spending obviously increases the market for everyone. So from that perspective, it's so early on in the game, and there's still, relative to the amount of time that people spend online, the dollars that are spent in advertising, as well as the dollars that are spent by consumers as far as part of that entertainment dollars, is so small that that answer should not be an issue for many years.
Once you start thinking, you know what, you go first.
Well, I think that certainly different media channels there's been shifting
How
of ad
polite.
dollars.
It's always last. It doesn't seem fair.
There were just a few, in terms of future thinking predictions about where media is going. We have, again, not necessarily seen across a wide group of the demographics the types of behavior that you're talking about. I mean, I'm not saying that people aren't watching TV and using their computers at the same time. I'm saying that TV viewing continues to go up, TV ad spend continues to go up, so you just have to be a little bit careful about what's really going on. Sometimes you get caught up in what everyone's talking about. So web video, for example, is still, I think, under 10% of total video viewing. Now, that's 10% that wasn't there before, so there are some dynamics around that, but we just have to be a little bit, make sure we're checking ourselves in terms of the real facts.
Yeah. I mean, the web video portion versus TV, I mean, if you look at web video, has really been a viewable experience probably for 18 months,
Right.
2 years. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
I think 10% in that time period is actually pretty, I'm talking about overall entertainment and social networks and people. I don't remember where I saw the study, but there was a study a couple of weeks or a month or so ago where they are saying that in a lot of cases some kids today are actually interacting with their friends more on their computers, whether it's through IM or it's through their social networks, than they are offline. And the generations that are growing up are so comfortable on computers and video games that they are definitely not spending as much time in front of, well, they're in front of TVs, but I don't know if they're watching the television as much as they were.
I still watch a lot of TV, and all of it's recorded. But to me, there's, again, if you look at widgets differently and you look at what the ecosystem is and the economics of widgets, if you look at a website, every consumer-facing website several years from now being a collection of widgets. Once you begin seeing it that way, and the way Turner will build their website is, and everyone will build their website, is by this modular way where it'll be content that's internal through their own widget platform that major media companies will have, or will partner with good companies like some of the ones up here. And the website itself will visually look like a collection of widgets on some level. It'll be well integrated. And when you click on those widgets, you'll go to deeper experiences, which will be sort of deep widgets. And they'll be provided by, as a service by many, many different companies. And the best companies out there, even if you look at what a portal is today, like Yahoo, you go there, it's RSS feeds for most people. That's how they get started with Yahoo in search, of course. And Google, you might argue the same, and AOL and all the others. But RSS feeds, in a sense, are an early, kind of widget. And when you see what publishers are going to have on their sites, it's going to be a huge ecosystem with tons of money, and there's plenty of room for the best trackers and aggregators. and widget builders and experience builders all around. And I think all the money on the internet is going to be in that space. And so I don't think it'll be a scarcity of money. And I also think that traditional media is going to be a leader, not a follower in this space. And they're in no rush because the ecosystem is just building. But within a few years, their content is going to exist everywhere, and they're going to have their own widget platforms, or hopefully they'll use ours. And suddenly, this ecosystem is just going to be a collection of widgets everywhere. And once you get out of the mindset of it being about MySpace and Facebook and Orkut and so on, suddenly widgets are a huge economic growth engine for the internet.
Well, that's a setup to say that widgets could represent the next generation of ad networks, particularly because widgets go across multiple websites.
I think ad networks will be widget distributors. If you look at what Yahoo, I believe, if they remain independent, AOL, and everyone who is now a portal, their primary mission will be an exchange. Content comes in, and their own content, and content goes out. To remain relevant, a portal has to be the center of that. And they'll do acquisitions in the space. I'm not pointing at anyone, but or at ourselves. And the reason being is because they want to be the distributor. They want to be the distributor of the internet. And distribution used to mean everyone go to the portal and watch. But in the future, that doesn't work anymore, not in a mashup world. So to remain relevant, they're going to be the distribution engine. And what their business is an ad network. And so the ad network and the widget distribution company are one and the same in the future, because if they want the inventory, they're going to have to package the content and the widgets and be part of the ecosystem. So they are widget companies, ad networks. The only reason right now ad networks can get away with just giving you ads as a publisher is because it's a new thing, and it just hasn't matured quite yet. Soon they're going to compete for that inventory beyond cost per thousand, and it's going to be all about content. It's going to be all about the kinds of things you find in widgets, and so the ad networks will be the widget leaders, I believe.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting about that, and again, the differentiation between, I think, content and advertising is really just relevancy. Once that's 100%, then if I was to potentially deliver an ad that was 100% relevant to someone, it's content. I often joke about who clicks through on Google Ads, and then I was guilty of doing that last week because I was looking up something, for music, and I'd found something that I wanted, like a gift for my little brother. So, I was kind of sitting there thinking about it, but the other day I was talking to the founder of ad.com, and this guy was telling me about what his mission was, what he was trying to do. And then you'll listen to him, and he was talking about, I want to match the content that advertisers have to publishers, make it 100%, right? His mission is to try to get the right content to the right people. It's not that dissimilar to if you look at what search engines were trying to do, and a lot of these people who are pulling content for users. So I think those missions are going to collide, and I think one way that you're going to see that is a lot of ad networks, and I think it's already actually happening. I mean, just with PointRoll, they're already doing that. With us, and a number of other companies are doing that. You're seeing content being served, and people grabbing that content, literally taking it from the ad network and placing it on their page. And I think that's it's going to be a market trend, and it's going to continue to persist. To answer your question, though, before you were talking about, are there too many layers? I think the biggest layer that you have to consider is what's the role of the social network itself in this new ecosystem, right? Because if you have a publisher who's building a widget, and that widget can go to various networks, and then you have the consumer, how does that social network get compensated, right? And I think that's something that everyone's kind of working out. But I think just looking at that as the one degree that you kind of have to figure out, I don't think it's an intractable problem. I mean, and a lot of social networks, and I'm sure everyone here is working with those folks, are very amenable to discussing that at this point.
Does anybody else have a view on what's the role of a social network? Or is that something you don't want to touch since they're partners?
No, I mean, the social networks, the reason that application and widget providers are needed is because there is a lot to be maintained in order for the social networks to really scale and grow and remain relevant and active. So the social network is very focused on making sure they maintain all the connections and maintain their scale, and they grow along with their user base. And therefore, that's why they work pretty closely with the application developers and encourage them to build the things that help people stick around and create engagement. So, Facebook sort of came out and said you can make money and you keep 100% of it. So from their perspective, a lot of it is similar to sort of eBay's role in their commerce marketplace, where they sort of set a lot of rules, and there are certain aspects that they maintain And then there's a lot of third parties that work with them to make sure that it is a vibrant community. And in the social networking space, it's very similar, where that type of relationship, in order to really scale and continue to grow and be relevant, it's important to figure out what the right rules are, and then you continue to adjust those and evolve over time.
To me, the social networks are also going to take a different tack within a year or so. My belief is that right now, after they begin fighting for the users coming into their portal, it'll be all about how they express themselves outwardly. So you could expect Facebook and MySpace and all the major social networks to begin thinking about how they're going to distribute what they are in a more comprehensive way to every website on the internet. They also, just like the ad networks, and sometimes they're one and the same, have an interest in getting outside of their portal. And so as a widget distribution platform, that's what Facebook will be, and it'll have a bit of a conflict at times with some of its providers, as will MySpace and anyone else who wants to be in that space. They're going to want to project social networking and user-generated content in the entire experience, not just a piece of it like they do now, but the entire experience across all sorts of websites, ESPN.com or TurnerClassics.com. Facebook's going to want to be able to help enable that site. And MySpace will want to help enable that site with programming functionalities, social networking, because in that context, there's much more money than in a social networking context on whether it's a CPM or per click or whatever else. And so the future of the social network is, now that they've consolidated inward and they have their audience, how do they then take what they have, their functionality and their community, and project it everywhere on the internet? And so I think they're going to be very aggressive within the next year or so in that area.
Well, we're also happy to have Heidi Henson from RockU join us.
Yeah,
we had
apologize
put out
for
an
late
APB
arrival.
on you. We're glad you were found.
Had some travel difficulties.
That's okay. It's a common theme. In fact, Ori Sohn from MuseStorm had a family emergency with his young family yesterday, so he wasn't able to join us as well. But just moving on to the data and measurement question, people generally think that in order for advertising dollars to really start flowing to a new medium, you have to make sure that you have effective measurement. What do you think is the state of measurement today as it relates to widgets, and where, what do you think are the primary challenges in that regard?
Well, as I said earlier, I think the measurement at this point, there's enough measurement to understand the size of the actual, distributed networks or widget or application networks. And then it's a matter of figuring out sort of what are the right ways to reach that audience. And, trial and error, A/B testing. But in general, from a data perspective, what will really make it work is because consumers are actually interacting with all of these applications, whether it's a video or slideshows or super pokes or whatever it is, you're actually learning so much about the experience and the intent of what the user is trying to do. So one of the things that will really help drive from an advertising perspective is being able to take that data and actually then focus when an advertiser, when TBS comes and says they want to reach a certain type of audience, and not just by age and location, but by actually intent and what they're actually trying to do, whether it's sports or movies or whatever it is, actually being able to take that data that you have as a company and use that to target things is really what is already helping to drive campaigns to be much more successful and have much better response rates than sort of the standard banner ads that people have today. And that's really by orders of magnitude. So over time, it's really using the data that you have access to, which is different than just sort of the age, location types of demographic data that you get from third parties, and using the intent and actual flows that the user's going through and leveraging that.
Yeah, from a metricing perspective, I think what he talked about, using metrics in order to develop better applications, is critical. So we've been working on metricing since 2006. I mean, we had the first, I think, viral metrics available for widgets, and kind of defined what it was to have installs and placements. But from our perspective, I mean, there's a different angle on metrics, which is we have full-featured metrics. You can even measure how many times it's being clicked play, where it's going, how it gets there. And that's important for optimizing your program. But I think for the industry to kind of grow and succeed, I think standardization is important. And for instance, one of our product managers is on the social media committee for the Web Analytics Association, and it's something that, although it's not the fun part of the business, I think that that's necessary for all of us to succeed, because finding those metrics and defining the metrics that are going to be the pinpoints for monetization is what's going to help media buyers compare apples to apples. right?
Does that committee have an acronym?
I think
Sorry,
it's, I don't know what the
too
committee
long.
has.
I'd agree in some cases with that. I think there's two issues. One issue is it's not a lack of data, it's about standardization and vocabulary around that data that allows people to have meaningful conversations, and those conversations are increasingly focused around engagement value rather than reach frequency. And so it's a new area, a new thing that we're measuring, and B, a lot of data being thrown at it in a lot of different ways to answer the question that in a lot of cases can be still a little bit confusing, especially from an advertising standpoint. So I think there's definitely some room to grow there.
Well, at RockU, if you aren't familiar with our company, we're one of the leading providers of widgets and social applications across social networks. So if you're on Facebook, you've heard of, Hug Me, Likeness Quiz, Superwall. Those are some of our applications. I think one of the challenges we run into with metrics is truly capturing the viral effect of some of the initiatives that we pursue. So beyond just the immediate page view or the interaction, we're doing some creative things with rich media where you can gauge the amount of time and extent of the user's interaction. As well as, when we run campaigns where people send gifts to each other, we can tell you how many gifts were sent. But there's this entire other viral bump that happens. For instance, if someone runs a campaign integrated with our application, it generates a newsfeed event, or if a user then forwards something that they received to another friend of theirs. So there's a lot of activity that we're it's a little bit more difficult to gauge, so there's still a lot to be done in that area.
Great. Well, I had one question on distribution, and this is specifically pointed at you, Dan, to kick things off. For media companies, what is the benefit of pushing your content out to other websites, and do you think over time could widgets become more valuable as a distribution method than some of your own sites?
Well, there's a couple answers to that. There's two different values. One is marketing value, and the other is advertising monetization value. The first is obviously hugely valuable on the marketing side in terms of getting your brand out there, creating an engaging experience for people who are fans of your show or your site or any of those things. From a monetization standpoint, it gets a little trickier. Because it gets down into what site is it on and what are your rights to put your advertisers associated with your content on that rights. It gets into a lot of back office type of things that need to get worked out. So former is clear. The secondary is increasingly clear as norms and standards around these types of deals get worked out. And in no doubt, I think they're both incredibly important. The latter in part because and this is something that media companies face a lot, which is, it's increasingly harder to get people to, for a lot of sites, not all sites, but to come through your doors. This is the issue of, do you pay to drive someone to your site, or do you let your content go to where they are? And in one, you're keeping control and you're in an environment that your advertisers appreciate, but you also risk sort of sitting there on your own little island as it gets as the tide comes up a little bit more each year, whereas in the other, you lose some control. You may even get into revenue sharing and other kinds of things that isn't always as exciting to traditional media companies. But then again, you're fishing where the fish are. So that's from a media company standpoint, I think those are the bigger issues.
Okay, I'm just going to ask one last question before we open it up to the audience. As a banker, if I didn't ask a financially oriented question, I wouldn't be doing my job. I think that the private money-raising environment has been pretty good for this sector. If you believe the press reports that you've read, Slide was very successful in raising a round. What do you think are the most likely monetization events for widget companies over the next couple of years? IPOs, M&A, in the internet ad network space, there's been a ton of M&A activity over the past 18 months, and that's likely to continue.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes to both?
I was just going to say, when you see widgets and how central they're going to be to major media companies, major internet companies, platforms, not so much the Poke Me application or this application or that, but the enabling technologies for distribution and tracking and so forth are going to be so valuable to large companies as they understand how they fit into this broader ecosystem. As widgets as deployment components, widgets as a million functional things that have nothing to do with these smaller applications. The basic infrastructure and know-how of the widget companies is going to become valuable to these major media companies in a very large way, I believe. And so M&A seems most likely. I don't think companies will be around, for 5 years and grow organically just because I think the technology and know-how is necessary for the larger companies once they figure out what they want to do with it.
I mean, I think you will see both probably. A lot of these companies as they grow up and are becoming large and have such a large reach across many different networks, and not just many different networks, but globally, the growth that you've seen in this space just in basically the last 2+ years, it's been unprecedented about how quickly they've grown. So, there will be technology plays that will most likely probably not end in the public markets, but there will also be, consumer plays where people have relationships with consumers, that will be able to be independent entities and, make the decision of what they want their exit to be. So, I mean, I think you'll see both. It just will take time, and, there's no need for most of these companies to force their hand at this point.
Great. Well, let me open it up to the audience for questions. You back there with the glasses?
It seems like Facebook has learned the power of the application to engage the audience, but just recently they seem to understand now that application can annoy and frustrate its users as well. How do you respond to the balancing act between application as engagement and not as spam?
I mean, you react to that by building products that the consumers enjoy. So, you learn what users like and what they don't like just by understanding how they interact with things. So, it's very important as you're building applications, and this is one of the reasons that, companies should consider, do they want to build their own application or do they want to work with companies that already have them and just integrate their content into it, is it takes a lot of work to build the right products that are sustainable over a long period of time. And just focusing on the user experience and learning and understanding what it is they like and don't like, and building fewer of the things they don't like and more of the things that they do. Just sort of a natural evolution. I mean, it's happened, before Facebook, MySpace had a thriving, widget economy, and the growth that we've seen and other companies have seen on there is strictly through user experience and understanding how users are engaging with it. And then over time, Facebook had channels that made it much easier to share your applications with your friends. So it made it easier to sort of focus on growth right up front. But long term, it's the same exact story of just building great products for your users.
Heidi, do you have anything?
Yeah, I agree. It's the natural evolution and maturing of the market. So, it started out as kind of a land grab. When they opened up the floodgates, people rushed out to acquire users. And I think that most of the major developers are really focused on improving that user experience, increasing user engagement, because a lot of us are very media-focused, entertainment-focused. So what is valuable to us is that the users find value in that application, are spending a lot of time there, coming back on a regular basis. So it's definitely to our benefit to make that, to optimize that experience. I think we've already kind of gotten through the, high octane growth phase. Now that there's some clear leaders, particularly in specific categories of applications, there's definitely going to be a lot more innovation in the future. But for applications like Superwall, Hug Me, Likeness Quiz, right now we're really focused on improving that user experience and making it more engaging because our users are valuable to us over time.
I would just add that I think widgets in social networks, Facebook, MySpace, eventually you're just going to hit a wall, and there's only so many applications over time within that specific context that will be hits. And I think it'll slow as the buzz sort of decreases around it. But the concept of widgets on all over the internet, that's unlimited. There's a million other contexts outside of this, friends. Who are my friends and how do I relate to them? On a lot of publishing sites. And so the diversity of widgets you'll find in the world will go beyond how my friends can interact socially. It'll depend on the context, from medical sites to, entertainment sites. There'll be a million ways that have nothing to do with, interacting with your friends that widgets will thrive.
And I also think one thing to add is, the Facebook platform did a great job innovating, opening up a lot of channels, and I think clearly, application providers pushed the limits of those channels, one, to obviously increase their reach, but two, to understand what the optimal user experience, and admittedly, I think some of those experiences were not, what we all wanted. I, for one, got very tired of getting notifications, but at the same time, it's very platform specific. I encourage people to kind of zoom out from Facebook because, a lot of the other platforms are not allowing some of the same communication channels. They're making different communication channels, and it is very early in the space. So I think you will continue to see this kind of dynamic tension between the platform, application creator, and the users, trying to figure out what the optimal balance is. And I think, right now, from an application perspective, the people who can figure out that balance obviously are going to be more successful because there is a backlash associated with it. But even, these guys know it. Within the next month or two, Facebook's like foundationally changing the way that they treat applications. So we just all have to keep on our toes and kind of keep in touch with that tension and be nice to users.
Question from the gentleman here with the red tie.
So what is the potential and the challenges of widgets to distribute highly relevant content in a B2B setting or like behind the firewall? If we have run a whole new set of challenges around getting in there and security and approval?
From our perspective, I think actually Eric has probably the best guy to talk to about that, but we've dealt with situations because we're a widget platform where people want to use in a B2B context. It was actually really interesting. I want to say about a year and a half, 2 years ago when we first went out, a lot of major media companies wanted to use it in almost an exchange format. So, okay, I want to build my media site off of another company's content. And obviously, if you look at major portals, Yahoo was cited as an example, they are already thinking about that in a modular sense. I think in that context, when you look at it from an exchange perspective, almost like what's AP 2.0, I think a lot of the challenges are going to be on licensing rights, which continues to be obviously a huge deal in media, and then security, right? So if I'm going to pay you to license the content, but then you're going to make it viral on your site, how does that virtuous chain work out? Inside the enterprise, I think is a totally different situation, and I would look to folks like BA, IBM, those types of situations, people who built portlet architectures for kind of the precedent on how that's going to evolve.
I would just add that I think widgets will be distributed slightly differently in enterprises and where a secure environment is needed. It'll be more sophisticated APIs as opposed to traditional widget embed code and deployment mechanisms, and there'll be widget engines that live within the enterprise but are fed from outside feeds or outside services that you can do in a more secure way than traditional widgets. But I also think at the same time, enterprise behind the firewall, in 80 or 90% of the contexts are going to be just fine with traditional widget distribution, so long as there is some way to control which widgets are in the environment and how they're distributed.
Question from the woman there.
Hi. With the newly release of the iPhone SDK, can you talk about your initiatives that you plan to take with expanding widgets on that platform and what you think the opportunity is there?
I think probably everyone here will say the same thing, that they plan to get to the iPhone. It's just growing tremendously. We've already started looking at mobile. For our platform, we've been sending to mobile and beta for a long time with media companies. And obviously, I think a lot of people have heard, Kleiner Perkins actually have their fund for iPhone. So I think there'll be a lot of innovation around that. It's really friendly towards widgets, though, already. So I think you'll see a lot of seamless transition of a widget being sent. I find it on a MySpace page, I'll pop it onto my iPhone or send it over to my desktop. So in our context, we're just trying to make sure that media providers have a single channel where they can write once and run anywhere. So that's the way strategically we're approaching it.
Another question up here from the front.
What are some of the specific units of measurement that marketers will pay for besides CPM? So what are you seeing marketers actually say, I want to pay for installation, I want to pay for clicks? And do you think any of these will supersede CPM and sponsorship?
So Rocky was one of the first ad networks within social networks to offer a cost per install model, so purely performance-based. We see ourselves as working with advertisers across the spectrum of however they want to have a presence within the social network. So if they want to create their own application and generate installations, we can help them do that. It's essentially a cross-sell through our existing platform.
So what are they paying for now? Like, I know we can do everything, but what are they actually buying now?
That they are, yeah. So it is a cost per install. So if they've created their own application as a marketing asset, we can help generate installs for them. Also, cost per impression, where very traditional through banners or rich media, and also occasionally cost per click or cost per acquisition.
Yes. So I mean, we're seeing
So the spectrum.
Yeah, we're seeing cost per the engagement concept is extremely important right now. So each time somebody engages with a super poke, as an example, when somebody sends one, they pay each time that happens. So
The unit is poke.
that could be the units, sure. You could look at it that way. A lot of our things, we allow people to personalize their content with sponsored content. So install is a word that they use on that one, or per download is a term that they use on that one as well. So those are sort of the two newest ones. Click is important as well, but as far as new ones that haven't been talked about, those are two of them.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the widget as an ad, that answers your question in another way. Every time you see a video playing within a banner context now, that's an ad unit that they've paid for, depending on the context of that widget, not depending on the pokes or the activity within the widget. Where does that widget live? Does it live, at ESPN.com, or does it live on, Joe's sports site, Des Moines, .com? And so the context of where the widget lives will determine the monetization, I think, more so than anything else.
I think that for just on the cost per install side, we've seen people, that's a new metric, but from what we've seen is everyone backs into an eCPM anyway. But I think that,
Which commodifies it.
I think actually there's actually a healthy exercise going on, because I think people want to pay for performance for branded advertising. I really do. I just think that the struggle is going to be what's the unit. So I think, what's going to happen is they're going to go to installs, they're going to back into eCPM, and then they're going to say, well, there has to be some sort of engagement units. And for video, which is, I think, the most mature of the distributed categories, you're seeing, like, okay, how many times is it being played, for instance? So I think that, yeah.
You're selling those as units?
Yeah, I've seen some people doing that. I just think that the middle ground between CPM and CPI is some sort of engagement unit, and I think it's the challenge for all of us to work on.
We have actually sold also some cost per view units with video specifically. But basically, time is really what it is. 6 months ago, you couldn't even give them anything but a CPM. Now they're backing into CPMs, and probably 6 months from now, they'll be comfortable with all these terms. And they'll use CPMs for CPM deals, and they'll use per install, per download, per view for those deals. So
Yeah, and I think it's just they need some type of benchmark. So a lot of agencies or existing marketers want to get comfortable and understand how this buy compares to their traditional methods. So for instance, some of the things we've done that are unique, where if we're integrating someone's brand in our application, say through our likeness quiz, creating a custom quiz for them, there's a nominal fee associated with that, and we mainly make it a CPM campaign for them, just so they get comfortable with it.
you have to fit into the spreadsheets. So our RFP spreadsheets drive a lot of the process.
I think we have time for one last question from that gentleman. You.
I have a question for Dan, asking to comment on one of Eric's last comments in the panel. I work for Naver, and we have a widget distribution platform like some of the players here, but we also have an ad network, like Eric was talking about. And we give away our platform, which is robust, but we view the value add in the distribution, not so much the technology. Eric said a lot of large media companies see a lot of value in the technology. Moving forward, as there are more and more widget distribution platforms out there, what are you going to be looking at as what's the value add that we're looking for in figuring out how to deploy our widgets through the various networks that are in the landscape?
I mean, I think it depends. I don't want to speak for all media companies. I can speak for Turner in that we have a pretty impressive in-house technical group that, so for a lot of the things that we're using on a B2B standpoint, those are channels that we've, in a lot of cases, constructed on our own or plugged in integrated a few third-party components, but for the most part, it's a Turner build. So, and not being entirely in that world, I don't want to go too far there. You had a question also in there about ad networks and whether that was something that was valuable. I wanted to just understand that. before I answered it.
Well, no, it's really about whether the value that media companies see in widget platforms moving forward will be in the technology in the platforms themselves, which is kind of sort of proliferating and becoming more commoditized, or actually in the distribution.
I think right now I still see some things that are going to be interesting to media companies that have to do with the technology. One is simplicity. One is one-click distribution to one solution for all sort of potential outlets where people might want to put widgets. And I think the biggest differentiator is going to come down to metrics and measurement and an ability for us to seamlessly go to a dashboard, pull data easily into our broader reports. These things from a media standpoint are not going to be, it's unlikely that we would create a widget with or for a client and sell that as a one-off. It's part of a bigger, broader ecosystem. So, the reporting needs to be seamless on there. And there's a lot of, I still do think that there are some technical differentiators there. It depends on how you're looking at it. If you're looking at it as something to package for sale, I believe there are technical differentiators. If it's about distribution, I'm a little less familiar with it, but to me it's more about where it's going and the permutation, the deals around that aspect that'll be sort of occupy the main part of our focus.
Just to clarify on that point is, what I meant are those who want to be ad networks. Individual media companies may or may not have need. They may be able to just put together what they need. But if you want to be a major ad network, you want distribution, as you point out, and you need technology that enables you to have wide distribution. So it's not just any media company that's going to need widget platforms and so on. It's those that want to be the leaders in the ad network business.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming today, and a thank you to our panelists.